Hi, listeners. Welcome back. It is so good to be with you. And I am so thankful to have Rhiana with us today. And it is a treat indeed because Rhiana has brought a friend of hers who is now a friend of the podcast. So, Rhiana, can you please tell us who you have brought for us today?
Absolutely, Ashley. Thanks for having me back. Bryony Schwan has been a dear friend of mine back since 1998 when I moved into a house with her in Missoula, Montana. And she's a hard one to introduce because her life has been one of remarkable creation. Bryony founded Women's Voices for the Earth, a nonprofit environmental justice organization, which included GUTS, one of the first outdoor leadership programs for girls, as well as Coming Clean, a national alliance of health and environmental groups working to reform chemical policies. Then she founded the Biomimicry Institute, establishing an international network for the creation of nature-inspired solutions for a healthier planet. She also founded Kind Kudos, which was a mobile app to help deepen social connection between people and decrease the human drive to overconsume. I also just found out she used to host a radio show for 10 years. And she's since become a consultant and coach and remains very passionate about creating a more just and sustainable world. The thing that strikes me most about Bryony and her work is that by following these callings, she's built community with each new project. She lives a really connected life, which I have found totally inspirational, and we're super excited to be talking with her today. Welcome to Connection from Here, Bryony.
Thank you, Rhiana, and thank you for such a lovely introduction.
It's hard to get it all in a brief intro after all you've accomplished.
Well, and I do want to say that all of those organizations I didn't do solely. I may have initiated them, and with Biomimicry Institute, I initiated that with my dear friend Janine Benyus, who's the author of the book Biomimicry. But all of those endeavors took a team effort, and I worked with amazing people on all of them. So it's very much a collective effort.
More people than ever are stepping away from organized religion. So where do we turn for support, meaning, and connection? Hi, friends, and welcome to Connection from Here, finding community in a changing world. I'm Michelle Perry.
And I'm Ashley Beatty Perry.
We're so happy you're here.
And that's part of why I wanted to bring you to Ashley, because that collective effort is this theme of connection that we want to talk about with you. So I'll leave it to Ashley.
It's so interesting you say that, Bryony, because I wanted to start with what did community look like for you growing up? And I say, what did community? Maybe it was a lack of community, but how did community shape you as in your growing up years?
That's such an interesting question because I really had to go back and think about it. I'd listened to some of your previous podcasts and know that you'd asked that question. And so I really gave some. And I have to say, I was really lucky. I had a lot of community growing up. My parents were pretty social, especially my father. My mother used to get a little bit more anxious about social things, but they had a big friend circle and we always had people over for dinner. And on weekends, my parents played tennis and with a whole bunch of other families. And so as kids, while the adults were all playing tennis, we would get up to all kinds of mischief. I grew up in Zimbabwe, which is a little different than my childhood experience was a little different than most Americans. It was beautiful in many, many ways growing up in Africa, but it was also challenging because, later on, I was actually living through a civil war as a child. But I think in many ways that tightened community because we were having to face these external threats that were challenging in many ways. So I think that was lucky for me, but I reflect on it because my sister and I are very different. And so we grew up in the same household. And my sister has struggled to create community and to make the kind of friend network that I have. So it's an interesting question to say, is it just your environment or is part of it what's happening inside of you? that enables you to make connection.
That is a fascinating insight, Bryony. Almost two different experiences out of what was a close-knit community growing up, and then that kind of ends up looking very differently as the two of you have gone through life. Can you say more about, initially, it seems to me that felt like a very safe place for you. You were held in that community space in the safety of, here are the adults, everybody's here for us, the kids are playing together. That sense of connection, I'm not here by myself. There's safety here for me to be who I am. Am I hearing that correctly?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think we sort of grew up in a little cocoon. And I also had a brother, and my brother's experience was very similar to mine. I think all three of us felt that way growing up. So I feel very lucky. But my brother and I are more gregarious and outgoing. I mean, ironically, I consider myself an introvert because I absolutely need quiet and space by myself. But I think my brother and I developed, I don't know whether they're tools or they're inherent, to actually continue to develop community.
Bryony, so at what age were you when you came to the United States? What age range would that have been?
I think I was 23 or 24 when I came to the US. So I was in my early 20s.
How did community land for you? Like when you came to the United States, was that just as an individual person? I'm wondering how that community aspect translated for you, coming to a place, a country that's not often known for that communal kind of spirit.
Well, it was very challenging. I was married when I came, and my ex-husband was doing he first started in a medical research position. We were living in Connecticut. And then he went on he had already been a practicing physician, but he decided to change his career and become a radiologist. So he went and did a radiology residency at Yale. And it was very difficult for me because I did not have a work visa. And when I moved to the US, I didn't know a single person. And I was sort of isolated and I wasn't able to work. And fortunately, we met up with another South African family. He actually met them. He preceded me by a couple of months. And so he had met our friends, the Weinbergs, who are still like family to me today after all these years. And so at least we had a starting point. If you think about it like coral, little coral polyp starts out and eventually brings a whole coral community. But I actually will just say we lived in England for about 2.5 years before we came here. And that was even more difficult because the British are very closed people. They keep to themselves. It was very difficult to make friends while I was there. I did have a wonderful job when I was living there, and I connected a little bit with the people that I worked with, but none of them ever invited you to their homes. So it was challenging.
And Rhiana, you may have something to say about this too, but it's so interesting because we've talked a lot about those of us who struggled to find community at an early age. And here's Bryony, who very much felt community that's in her as she's growing, but then it becomes the absence of that. Whereas that felt like here's the context. I am in a communal context, but now here I'm finding, in moving, and Rhiana, we've talked a lot about that too. Our modern society is such a transient society. So in the moving, what does that do to us? And what does that mean for community? Those of us who have been able to experience community in one place, is that it doesn't necessarily translate to here. Bryony found herself in completely new cultures, and this translation of community was just not happening.
Well, and I'm just thinking about, Bryony, like your internal seeking, right? So here you are, you grow up in this, what sounds like a fairly idyllic family community, but then you're facing civil war in your country. And so I imagine as, a young person, there must be a certain level of real unsettling that happens with the uncertainty of war. And so wondering about what that felt like for you, that change when you became aware of war and you became aware of the threat, and then how it was to actually leave your country, to choose to move internationally. And at the same time, you're young for getting married. And so
Very.
I'm really wanting to know what your internal temperature is with all of this and like what you felt your heart was seeking, because clearly, as we know from your story, you have followed your desires to create and build, and like you've brought so many of your dreams to reality. But I want to know what that internal environment felt like from those changes of childhood through war, through international moves.
That's actually a really challenging question because I think I was a really late bloomer. I didn't really know who I was or what I really wanted. At least that's my perception. It was actually interesting. My ex-husband and I are very good friends. And I asked him a few years ago, I said, tell me what I was like when you met me, because I don't remember. I mean, I remember the things I did, but I don't remember who I was as a person. And he basically said, you were pretty driven and fierce. Even that, yeah, but that's not that's not my remembrance or perception of myself at all. And, you commented about me being young when I got married. I was very young, but I grew up in a culture where that's what women did.
Sure.
You finished college and you got married. And a lot of my friends got married and had babies right away. I think, I ended up taking a different path because I left Southern Africa and moved to the US. And so that sort of thrust me into a different place with lots more opportunity, I think. But I think, and I really think, Rhiana, I didn't fully comprehend what was happening in Zimbabwe at that time. I mean, I knew the day-to-day challenges that people faced in the civil war. For instance, we'd have to drive from town to town in an armed convoy. We'd have to think about things like landmines. Most of the violence happened in rural areas. We did feel it a little bit in the cities, but it was mostly in rural areas and especially on farms. And one of my best friends was from a farming family. And so I spent time and sort of experiencing what it was like for farmers. But I think I really had a child's mind about it. I didn't fully understand what the big picture was. And it wasn't until later in life that I really fully comprehended that. So that's actually a difficult question for me to answer.
I figured it was a little bit challenging, but it's interesting what you just said, that you, as a child, didn't really fully comprehend the big picture. And yet here you ended up moving into environmental work, which is all about the big picture and all about looking at like the trajectory of our planet. And so that's fascinating to me.
I think that the pathway that was fairly clear because when I was in college, well, first of all, I look back and my father was very an activist in a different way. He started a publishing company for African education at a time when there were very few options for Indigenous Africans. I really didn't realize the implications of that until I was an adult. But of course, those things rub off on you. But then when I was at university in South Africa, I got involved in the anti-apartheid movement. And that was sort of my first sort of cutting my teeth on political activism. But again, I was very much a follower, not a leader in any way. And then when Chris and I split up, it was my ex-husband, I eventually got a job with Yale University. I was a photographer for the university and part of the Clerical and Technical Workers Union. And we went on strike, and it was the largest strike of predominantly female workers in the US. And so that sort of thrust me into a different activist realm. But again, I was very much a follower. I wasn't fully cognizant of what that all meant, just, experienced what collective action would do and how to change things from a collective action perspective. But then when I moved to Montana, I remember flying into Montana for the first time and looking out of the window and seeing these beautiful forests clear cut. And I was horrified that anybody could do such a thing. And I got engaged in a local environmental organization. And then that was the end of it. I was on a path of activism. And that's sort of been the trajectory of most of my life.
Well, and Bryony, and what I'm hearing in that too is that the collective is a theme that has kind of, even unbeknownst to you as a young person. I mean, here you were in a collective, in a community, and then somehow coming to a new country, finding it isolating, but yet even so, you ended up in a collective. There is a community that now is taking collective action. I'm so interested in that. It's almost that's something that was just in you to seek. I can do more if I'm part of a larger. It wasn't you as an individual, like I think so often in our American culture, it's I do this and I do this, but it's just like you came to it with the understanding of we are in this together, and the way to go about change will be if we do it together. You did not have to overcome an individualistic mindset to understand the power of community in that way.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And I think that is rooted in the community that I grew up with in Zimbabwe. But, it's interesting that you say that, because I think back to the first organization I got engaged with, which was a group called Friends of the Bitterroot. The Bitterroot is a valley here in Montana. And it was a group of people, and a pretty diverse group of people, age-wise and background-wise. And they were like a family. We were collectively working to protect the area, stop what we considered to be disastrous timber sales, to stop streams from being polluted with waste and mining waste. But it was interesting. I had a mentor, Stuart Brandbook, who was actually one of the people who ushered in the Wilderness Act and was a very important person. But Stuart said something very interesting to me one day. He said, we were organizing some kind of community event. And he said, the most important thing you can do, he said, I want you to stand at the door and greet people. And he goes, and I want you to see whether they have a pulse. And if they have a pulse, I want you to latch onto them and not let them go until they're fully engaged. And I'll never forget that, because that's exactly what he did with me. He saw that I had a pulse, and Stuart called me every day, every single day, and said, what are you doing? How are you doing it? Have you called your congressman today? But it was also a personal check-in, like, how are you doing? And he became sort of like a father figure. But it was important, right? Because it was about connecting. Yeah. It was about connecting at a very, very personal level. And I won't ever forget that.
That is fascinating to hear, Bryony, because the collective, but even in that, the individual was not forgotten. I mean, there's something about you, he was calling to check on you.
Yes.
How are you? Yes. Are we doing this action today, or these action items that we're taking today? But it also, how are you today? The fascinating piece of holding those both in place is that it almost, would you say, I would think from an American mindset that, to have somebody say, you as a person, you as an individual matter. Yeah. You matter to this collective. Yes, we are a community. Rhiana and I have talked about this quite a bit. Is like, where is the individual? How do you do the both of those things? And it sounds like your mentor was so gifted in saying, here we are taking action as a community, but you as an individual, you matter to our community and what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so true. And I remember because Stuart and his wife, Anna V, at one point their house burned down, and which is really, as that's a horrible thing for people to go through. And it was really interesting because so many people showed up at their home to help go through the debris, to bring meals, to help them transition from this particular event. And so it just goes to show the strength of that community.
Yeah. I think that's a huge point. I'm just listening to you talk, and I'm thinking about how in a lot of political, social justice, environmental movements, we always talk about your voice matters. We always say that one vote could change everything. And we talked about this on a recent episode about like the universal being the particular. And it's the same thing, like being a member of a collective is an important sense of belonging. But it also, when you're a member of a collective, because you're a group that's working toward a common cause or sharing a common interest or doing a shared activity, they notice when you're not there. You matter as a person. The group wants to know, how are you doing? The group will check in on you if you're missing. And so that sense of belonging, it works both ways. Like, you get a sense of being part of a community, but the community gets a chance to see each individual. And that can't be understated or overrated. It's huge to making us feel like we matter and we're worthy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And too, I'm thinking, Rhiana, the difference that makes, because we've talked about stories of where here's the community or here's the collective, but you don't matter. It's like, it's all like, who you are. Does this fit for you? That really does not matter. It is so much community that you might as well not even be a unique individual, because that really is not what's valued here. But Bryony is saying this is her experience in this community, and then I want to hear how she built that out going forward, is that it is really the both and here. That this community, it matters that you're here, and our collective can do better work because you as an individual, with everything you bring to the table, matters. Your story was very much part of the land in Zimbabwe. And so you brought that with you, and how valuable to the community that your unique experience was. Oh, I just love how you're what a great mentor, Bryony.
He was. And I've been lucky. I've had many. So I feel very lucky.
So can you take us forward that experience of communal action together? Where did you go from there? Tell us more, because I would like to get into, as you go forward, every piece that you are creating, I'm noticing that in your story, you also are building community around it. So can you take us forward into how then some of the things you learned from this communal experience at first starts to build in you, and how you choose to create?
Yeah, and I think there's one thing I want to talk about in particular. So my career was primarily in environmental activism. I went on eventually to graduate school to do a master's in environmental studies. And while I was there, I decided that I wanted to start an organization to basically bring women's voices out in the environmental movement, because at that time, all the conservation organizations that I was engaged with were primarily run by men and white men. And I felt like that the movement would never be successful if it just featured white men, that we needed to reflect the diversity of the population. And I would see women come to meetings and stick around once or twice and then leave. It's a long story, which I won't go into all the details, but I then founded Women's Voices for the Earth, and along with an amazing group of women. And I was there for 13 years. And during that time, I worked on a lot of national campaigns, and it was a very interesting time. And then I got burned out, because we eventually ended up working around chemicals and how they impacted women and children's health, always though with a focus on how do we bring women's voices to the fore. But it was very difficult to be reading these stories every single day about how basically we're poisoning our planet and ourselves. And after being there for 14 years, I was pretty burned out. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. And then my colleague and friend, Janine Benyus, had written this amazing book called Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature. And her whole idea is that all the answers exist out in nature already. Organisms over 3.8 billion years have figured out how to live sustainably on this planet, and that we can find those solutions in nature. And it was exciting to me to move from just sort of pushing back and saying, no, stop polluting, stop doing what you're doing, to say to companies, okay, you want to design X or Y, there is a way to design it sustainably. And there's a way to go to nature to say, what organism in nature has already done this? And how can I find my design ideas from there? I loved that work. I was there for 8 years. We worked on projects all over the world. We had projects on almost every continent. It was a whole other community, and that could be a whole hour conversation all of itself. But I think for me, what's relevant about this particular topic is that when I finished at Biomimicry, I, again, was fairly burned out. And I got a 3-month sabbatical and took myself and my dog, and I bought an old van, and I drove down the West Coast and went on long walks on the beach and in the redwoods, trying to ask the question about what's next, because I felt like I was missing something, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. And at the same time, I was also dealing with my sister, who was living in England, or is still living in England, who is very socially isolated and alone and has difficulty making friends. And oftentimes she would call me during the day, but I would be too busy. I'd be in a meeting and I couldn't take her calls or couldn't really respond to her needs. And so what kind of came together for me in this time was realizing, I sort of went through this whole thing about, okay, I worked in this activist space, this advocacy space, trying to tell companies, governments, the public about what we shouldn't be doing, sort of pushing back. Then I worked in this solution space, but I was like, the question that kept coming to me is, how did we get into this mess in the first place? Why are we live on this incredibly beautiful planet that supports life so well? Why are we soiling our own nest? And what I realized was that we get bombarded with messages from a multi-billion-dollar marketing and advertising industry every single day that says to us, if you just have the right car, the right clothes, the right house, you'll be happy. And that is just so not true. And right at that time, I took a course with UC Berkeley on the science of happiness. And what the research, and it was super useful and very interesting. And of course, what the research shows, and we all inherently know this, it's not the material things that make us happy. It is community. We are beings that need to be connected to other people. And we also need a sense of purpose. We need a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And so often those two things are intertwined. And the more intertwined they are, I think the greater our happiness. So that is what drove me to, it was the craziest thing I ever did, but I wanted to create a digital form of, lots of people have a shoebox in their house or a drawer where they will keep notes and letters from people. You know, someone sends you a really sweet note that says, I really appreciate you. You did X or Y for me, or it's your birthday and I just want to remind you that you're very important in my life and I love you. We all keep those things in weird places and we forget about them, right? And then, you're going through the attic and, you find the shoebox and you read all that stuff and it just fills your heart and you feel so good. And so I thought, well, could I create an app that would do that same thing? So the idea behind Kind Kudos was a way to tap in all the time to those kinds of messages. We designed a beautiful app. It was out there in the world for a couple of years. It didn't fully take off. I don't think because the concept was wrong. I just think from a technical standpoint, it was difficult to create. I actually think had we done it during COVID, it might have taken off. And I also think there's digital tools now that we have now that we didn't have then. But it was, to me, it was, the idea was really interesting. I wanted to help people feel connected to other people, connected to a sense of purpose, and to really get clear on what's important in life and what gives us joy. And it is that connection with other people, and to know that we're worthy and that there are a group of people out there who care and love us, whether those are 3 people or 300 people. So that was sort of a very big pivot for me in my work.
This is why I wanted to have her on this show, right? Because
That's
Bryony has walked a path of determination and creativity and values, but she does it all because she has a heart. And I know that because she's a dear friend of mine, and I just know it personally. But that's what Ashley and Michelle have found in creating Hope Base, and what we're seeing in the groups we've created for Hope Base. And this podcast being called Connection from Here. I mean, you're naming, Bryony, exactly what we're trying to tap into is people need to feel connected and feel held by that connection, and to feel like what they're doing matters. And in this political climate right now, so much of that is threatened for so many people. And, how we can find more ways to generate spaces that feel safe, spaces that feel like true connection. And Ashley identified it last episode we had, which is, where do you get to be your authentic self? Where are you safely seen and able to fully be who you are? I wish your app didn't have to make it, because we're creating something new every day, but that's your intention is exactly it.
Bryony, it is such a gift because you recognized in the activist space, here's a place where women are not being heard. People who are indigenous into this area are not being heard. How to lift this, it's almost ingrained in you, this both and. It matters what we're doing, our purpose, and it matters, you individually matter to this, and your voice matters, and your story matters. And it seems like you have really carried that from all the way from Zimbabwe through England to America. I mean, it's been holding on to this. We matter here together, and you matter individually, and your voice should be part of what we're holding together in the community. And I think it's a rare thing. It is a rare thing to let's hold up your individual voice as we're doing this together. I thank you. Thank you for the ways you have known to be a community builder. In each turn, you have built in this way that does not leave the individual in their authentic self behind.
Thank you.
This has been such a treat. I tell you what, Bryony, again, thank you for all that you've done. And one of the things that as we are wrapping up the episode, we have been calling our ending segment a step from here. And so one of the things that we'd like to do is leave our listeners with a little bit of something that they can maybe implement in the next few days, in their next week, ways that would build connection or care or a community in their daily life, just a little something that they could do. Do you have something that we could take with us this week?
I do, and I've been thinking about it more because actually, my sister is now facing a move in England. She's been forced to leave her home that she's been in for 24 years and move. And she's struggled with community and connecting so much. And so I've been thinking about it also for her. And so I sort of reflected on what is it? How do I do it? And I'll just say that I think relationships and connection take investment. And we have to think about how have other people gifted us with connection. And I feel very gifted with my friends who, reach out. And so I make a purpose every single day to reach out to someone that I care about and to call them and say, how are you doing today? Or I know you've been going through a tough time. How's it going? And so I think a lot of us tend to sit back and think passively that, somehow somebody will figure out that I need to be reached out to. And it requires us to actually reach out. And the more we reach out to other people, the more they will reach out back to us. And I think about someone like my sister who has a very difficult time because of the community that she lives in, just because of, some of her own challenges. And so part of it, I would say, is think about some of the things that you really love to do, whether that's hiking, photography, crafting, knitting, woodworking, whatever it is, and find a group of people that are doing that and go and join that group. Because bringing that activity helps you make a connection with other people. So that's one of the things I would do. I would look also for spiritual communities, whether you come from a more traditional church, join a church, join a Buddhist group, whatever your thing is, find a group of people who share that and do that. Volunteering is also another fantastic way to create connections, because that also, you're out helping other people. And we all know that that is one of the things that actually brings us joy. And it enables us to meet other people who also are sharing in that. So that's another great way to make people. And then the last thing I would say is what I call them love letters. So I've been doing this a lot lately for people who've been having a big birthday. And in fact, I just finished one for a friend who's retiring, where instead of giving them material gifts for a birthday or a special occasion, I will go and ask friends of that person. So let's say it's Mary Jane. I will go and ask Mary Jane's friends to write a love letter to Mary Jane about why she matters in people's lives, and then put those together in a book or a little folder or a little box and give that as a gift. Because I don't think there's a greater gift that you can give anyone than, because I think people think this, like we think wonderful things about other people all the time, but we don't think to tell them. And one of the things I push myself to do is, even if I'm going into Starbucks to get a cup of coffee or some other coffee shop, and I think someone looks great that day or they have a sweet smile, be brave. Tell them that.
Yeah.
Just tell them.
Yeah.
If you have a nice thought about someone pops into your head, tell them.
Those moments of connection.
That's like your kind kudos, right? And especially those love letters, just like that, a little shoebox full of love notes from someone. It's a lovely thing. Oh, thank you.
Because when that person's feeling blue, they can go to that shoebox and they will feel better.
That's right.
Well, and it's such a reminder that connection in our daily life, we can be talking about small moments, small ways that really do build it. This doesn't have to be a grand thing every day. It's just in our everyday life, these small things matter for building a sense of care and connection with others. Bryony, thank you again so much for all that you are and all that you do. It has been a treat. Thank you for coming to be with us.
Thank you. Enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad you could be here, Bryony. And thank you, Ashley.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Rhiana.
Thank you, listeners, and we will connect again soon.